Welcome to the Crazy Chicken People podcast. If you're crazy about chickens, then you're in the right place. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Crazy Chicken People podcast. Thank you for joining me again. I hope that everyone out there is getting excited for the holidays. I know I definitely am. So much so, in fact, that I went and did some Christmas shopping this last week for some of my favorite people, those being you listeners. I got something cool that super excited to pass out to at least a few of you. Wish I could buy something for everybody, but I did get something kind of cool. I think you'll be pretty happy with it. Now, I do only have a few, so I'm going to have to come up with a creative way to pass these out. So if you listen to the end of the episode, I'll let you guys know what that is. I'm also going to share a pretty cool resource that I found recently that is helping me to take better care of all my animals around the farm, not just my chickens, but our donkey, the goats, the sheep, the cats, the dog, 56 animals in total. I think this is really going to be helpful for me, and I'm really excited to let you all know about it. So I will have that for you at the end also. As for today's episode, we're going to be talking about a couple of topics that kind of go hand in hand. That being the importance of making sure that your chickens have access to grit and how making that part of their regular healthy diet, along with everything else that we feed them, can help to reduce the risk of getting sauerkraut. So to start off, for anyone who may be unsure of what exactly grit is or why it is that chickens need it, grit is really nothing more than small pebbles or rocks that your chicken will pick up and swallow to help them break down and digest their food. Since chickens don't have teeth to chew, they instead have a two-part stomach. And in that first part, called the crop, they store that ingested food temporarily while it starts to break down. And it then moves into that second part of the stomach, which is the gizzard, that being a very tough, muscular organ, really thick lining. This is where the grit is actually held, and it helps them to break down and digest some of those harder or denser foods they might eat. As that gizzard muscle contracts, the grit gets ground up against that food that's in there, breaking it down into smaller, more digestible pieces. This allows for better nutrient absorption and really just a healthier digestive system altogether. Without grit, chickens might struggle to break down and process some of those harder items like grains or seeds, things they pick up, maybe some bugs, which, if they're not properly broken down, it can leave some of those undigested materials to accumulate somewhere. This could potentially cause a blockage in their digestive tract and eventually leads to issues like an impacted crop. Now, something I didn't know for quite some time is that providing grit is especially important for young chicks that are just learning how to eat these solid foods. This actually helps them to develop healthy digestive habits from an early age, and having it available to them when they are young teaches them that they need it, that they should be looking for it. And because most of the chicks raised now are raised by people rather than a mother hen that would teach them, we really need to help them to pick up on some of these instinctual things as they grow up. Now I keep a bag of chick grit around all the time, and right from the start, I make sure that they at least have access to it. I don't know that they really start eating on it when they're real young, but at least I know it's there, and because they're so curious, they eventually get in there and start pecking at it. If chickens or chicks don't have access to grit, they may start to experience some poor digestion, and this could mean that they're not actually going to get all the nutrients that feed is meant to provide to them. And when they aren't able to break these foods down in the gizzard, larger food particles can end up entering the intestines. This can result in nutrient deficiencies because they aren't being absorbed the way they should. And this can also cause some digestive discomfort because, they've got something a little bit too big trying to make its way out. Chickens may also show signs of malnutrition, weakness, and poor growth. Again, all because they might possibly not be getting what they need if those foods aren't broken down properly. Now, I should mention, you may very well go and read that if your chickens just eat crumble or pellets, that they don't need grit. I have a feeling this comes from factory farming methods, though, because This is really only true if your chickens eat a strict diet of processed layer crumble or pellets. That means no free ranging, no kitchen scraps, no bugs, no veggies, no wild greens, all the stuff that we really try to make sure our chickens get as part of a total balanced diet. So, if you read that your chicken doesn't need grit for these reasons, again, this might be true, but if they're eating anything else, kitchen scraps, scratch, all those things, then the grit is a very important part of their diet and very much needed. Now, if you've ever looked into grit, you may have heard that there's a couple different types. You have insoluble grit and soluble grit. Both are important and serve different purposes. The soluble type, or the kind that could be broken down in the digestive tract and absorbed, includes things like crushed eggshells or oyster shells. You probably give something like this to your chickens already for the calcium, which is very important. But you may not have known, I know I didn't, that those very large abrasive pieces of material can actually help them to break down their other foods as well, which makes it another good reason to always keep those things available to your chickens. Insoluble grit is probably what is more commonly being referred to or what you think of when you're talking about chicken grit. And really, this is just small pebbles and little stones that a chicken picks up. This is what ends up sitting in the gizzard and really do the heavy lifting when it comes to breaking down the larger, harder things that they might take in, or even to break down some of the greens that they typically swallow in larger pieces. As far as how to get that grit into your chickens, there's a few options. If your chickens are allowed to free range or live in a run that has a lot of these small rocks and pebbles in the dirt, there's a pretty good chance that you don't actually need to provide any supplemental grit to them. They're very likely getting it when they pick and scratch around. I'm sure you've seen them digging through the dirt and pecking in there. It's not always bugs that they're going after. So if you're in that situation, it certainly doesn't hurt to put a little bit more grit out, but they're probably okay just getting it from the ground. But if your chickens are full-time enclosed and maybe in a space that really doesn't contain that, it could just be that the topsoil is very free of those rocks. Maybe you have them on sand, which I think is a little bit too small to act the way grit needs to. But if they're not getting these things from the ground naturally, then it is important that we provide that secondary source for it. I have read that some people will mix the grit in with their feed. It's a very low ratio. I mean, they're not eating a ton of this, so I guess that's not terrible, but to me, it just seems like a little extra work. I don't really want to have to bother with measuring out and mixing grit into food every time I put it in their feeder. So I really just make sure that they've got a dish of it that they've got access to all the time, knowing that they're only going to take what they need. They're not going to overdose on grit or anything. In fact, chickens really only go through about an ounce of grit a week. And that's just because, some of it's going to move out of their system. They need to replenish that. It's not something that they need like a whole bunch of. In fact, the average chicken ends up going through only really a couple of pounds of these pebbles per year. So you can imagine on a weekly basis, it's not a whole lot. So if you keep a dish of grit in the run that they can peck at as needed, I would just keep that thing full and really they should be good to go. While we're talking about the importance of grit, and I did mention the impacted crop earlier, which leads to something that can be fairly common in chickens, and that is sour crop. Now that's actually a symptom of their impacted crop, which may have issues because they're lacking grit, but there's a few other things that can lead to sour crop as well. This could include, if they eat some sort of a foreign object, a piece of metal or plastic or string, anything that could damage that crop or possibly get stuck in their digestive tract, that can cause some real problems. Severe worm infestations are going to cause a whole lot of issues. Excessive use of antibiotics can kind of disrupt their normal balance of gut flora. And then, of course, things like unsanitary conditions, particularly water or feed that has become contaminated with feces. This is why I hate using those gravity waters. They just sit so low, they always seem to get poop in them. Moldy or rotten food can definitely make them sick and cause some digestive issues. Or just a poor diet. Things like overly processed foods or sugar that they might get in some table scraps, definitely not meant for their little bodies and can also lead to some issues. Now, any one or combination of these things can contribute to an impacted crop, which will likely turn into sour crop. This is a condition caused by some sort of a blockage in the digestive system or when the healthy bacteria in a chicken that help with digestion and food breakdown become compromised. And what's going on in there is actually a type of a yeast infection. And you may have read or seen that medicines like Monistat can help in treating this, which kind of surprised me when I first saw that. I thought that can't be right. But for this type of infection, that food gets in there and, because of a backup or something, it'll actually start to build up and become fermented. It's typically pretty easy to spot, although by the time you do see it, it probably means they're in some pretty bad shape. You're going to see that area up towards the top of their chest looking extremely swollen and protruding out. If you get close to that chicken, you're probably going to smell something really bad coming from there, like they've got really bad rancid breath. And while this is something that can be treated at home, fortunately, your best bet is really trying to keep your chicken's gut health in check. So, some of the things that you can do to help keep that digestive tract healthy and working correctly is adding some apple cider vinegar to their water. Now, this helps them to maintain proper balance levels of acid in their systems. I don't just keep it out there all the time. Typically, I'll, mix up a few gallons, take it out there, let them have that. Just because to me it seems weird to only provide that, I'll typically have one water out there that has the mix of apple cider vinegar and then another one that's just fresh, clean water. And then the other things like electrolytes or the apple cider vinegar in this case, I give as something on the side. Now, there is some other preventative actions you can take. This could include keeping your chickens free of worms, either using manufactured medicines or a combination of natural herbs and treatments, feeding a balanced, high-quality diet that's completely free of any moldy or rotten foods. Make sure that feed and water are not contaminated by poop. This will go a long way in preventing a lot of different things, and that's why I prefer to use the waters or feeders that are really good at keeping things out. I prefer a little bit of waste over a feeder that gets full of poop. As a maintenance thing, when you're cleaning that coop, make sure that you pick up any uneaten food, whether that's their crumble that falls around their feeder or even fruits and veggies that you might have thrown in. You don't want those things to sit around and become moldy. One of those chickens eventually could eat it, and now you've got a problem on your hands with that. Here's one that I didn't know until recently, and this is keeping the grasses that you give them relatively short. I had never really thought about this. I've never seen them struggle with the hay or wild grass that I throw in there. But I guess I can see how a long piece, and I've seen them grab one and kind of just chomp, chomp, chomp as that whole thing slides into their mouth. A piece that's maybe a little bit too long could get down in there, kind of coiled up, turn into this ball that just won't digest. Or maybe even some thicker pieces could get jammed up in there. I still think that they're totally okay getting these sort of things to eat. I'm just in the future going to make sure that I break these things down a little bit more and provide them shorter pieces so that nobody chokes on a piece of hay. Avoiding any long-term antibiotic use, as these could eventually start to weaken their natural defenses, is something to keep an eye on. If you've got an animal that's seriously wounded, I'm sure that they need those, and taking care of that first is going to be most important. Just keep in mind that once they come off of it, some of those natural defenses they have could be compromised, and they may need a little extra care kind of rebuilding those. And then, just like we've been talking about, making sure that they have access to grit all the time. When it comes to actually treating sour crop, honestly, I've not had to deal with this with my flock yet. I'm sure it's coming at some point, but I've just been lucky until now. But here, just in the last couple of weeks, my sister-in-law, who has chickens and lives just across the street, she called me up, sent me a picture of her chicken. I could not believe what I saw. This crop was so swollen and sticking out. It was like there was a baseball in there or even a softball. It was huge. And she had asked me if I ever dealt with this, and, I told her that I had not. She had not either to that point. So I jumped into some chicken groups. I started doing some searching on what people have done and recommendations they had for treating this. And I think she ended up trying a combination of things. Part of it was really massaging that crop. I know she isolated that chicken immediately after we started talking. And I had found in so many spots where it said you actually have to keep them from eating or drinking for about a day. I think she gave her a little bit of water here and there over that 24 hours, just a little bit because it feels so weird to deprive an animal of water. But I guess doing that actually allows, whatever is going on inside that crop to not get anything else built up on top of the problem, and then allow that to hopefully start to work its way through. Now, saying all that, I don't feel totally comfortable giving a lot of advice on how to treat for sour crop, but there's definitely a lot of resources out there to look these things up. But this actually brings me to something that I just found recently, and I'm kind of excited for it. I don't even remember exactly how I found this, but there's a website I ended up on, and it's called askaveterinarianonline.com. I will share a link to this because I think at minimum it's worth checking out. And then there's an app that they end up asking you to download called Just Answer. So I saw this and it was advertised as where you basically send a message through this app. And in this case, it's answered by one of their licensed vets that work with this business. My guess is that they are just like signed up to work with them and just taking these questions as they get directed to them. But when I saw this, I'm thinking like, okay, I've got 56 animals and I've always known that I can't really afford to take an animal to the vet every single time one gets sick. I have to learn and understand how to take care of them on my own. And I thought, if I can actually text a vet just any time of day, anytime I have a question, anytime something serious comes up, like that would be so helpful. Now, this isn't free. It is a $5 a month charge to stay connected. And at first I thought, well, for $5, I'll just sign up and see if it's even real, worth a little bit of gamble. Now, I should have realized as soon as I gave them my credit card info, they charged me for a full year. But I was very happy to find that as soon as I started texting, I was getting replies back within, I think it took about an hour to initially get a reply back. And then I had this back and forth with a vet until she had really answered everything that I asked. So for me, who has a lot of animals and just can't take them all in for medical treatment, but really needs to do it on my own, this is worth well more than the $5 a month to me. Knowing that at any time I've got the advice of a vet at my fingertips is totally worth it. I'm not trying to sell you on this. I have no stake in it. I just thought it was really cool and worth checking out. The other thing that I was kind of excited to share, I mentioned getting some Christmas gifts. I go to this feed store on my way home from work, a couple times a week, and I noticed that there was a print shop right next door to that feed store. So the other day I just went in there. I was like, hey, I've got a podcast. I'd like to get some shirts made. So without putting really too much thought into it or getting overly creative with the design, I did get some shirts made and I would love to pass them out to, well, at least as many listeners as I can. Honestly, I only got like 15 made. I've already given a few away, but whatever I've got left, I'm totally happy to give them to anybody that would like one. Now, like I said, I'm kind of limited on stock and I probably didn't do a great job in picking out the right sizes, but for anybody that wants to shoot me an email, crazychickenpeople@yahoo.com. Just let me know that you're a listener. If you want to include a picture of a chicken or a funny story about your chickens, that would be great. Let me know what size shirt you would want. They're all men's size. I really didn't think this through when I bought them. It was just kind of on a whim. Send me a message, and the first few that I get that I can fill that order, I'd be happy to send them to you. This is kind of a bummer. I did find out that it's extremely expensive to ship overseas. There's a listener I've been talking with a little bit on Messenger, and I really wanted to send her a Christmas chicken ornament for their tree. It was like $70 just to ship something to Australia. I was like, I can't do it. I'm sorry, I can't do that. So I don't know that I could send anything overseas. It's just too pricey for me. But if you're here in North America, send something to me. If you are one of the UK or Australia listeners, send me a message anyways. I'd really like to see if I can figure out some way of getting this over there without it being so dang expensive. We'll see. Anyhow, guys, have a great Christmas. I really look forward to hearing from some of you. Hope that I can get some shirts out. All right, you guys, have a great week, and I'll talk to you again soon.